Hey guys, today I'm going to be painting Herodotus from Aeon Trespass Odyssey. I'm going to start with the basic skin tone by Vallejo. This is my go-to base color for a skin. You can darken it, you can tint it, you can highlight it. It's just, I think, the perfect base coat for like 90% of the painting I do. If I do dark skin tone, I typically do it like a chocolate brown, which is really good. We get to use that a little bit later, so look forward to that, I guess. But again, this is a resin version of the miniature, so you know they're subject to change on everything, but this will give you kind of a sense on just, I guess, how this paints up, how it looks painted up, and just kind of the process you might follow if you so choose. One of the things I like about these kind of miniatures, these styles, is I like any kind of miniature where I can base coat something and then feel like I'm like 80% done. Now, of course I'm not. There's a lot more to this than just the skin, and the skin, because it's such a big part of this Titan and this miniature, you're gonna want to do it some justice and actually take some time and do some good highlights on it, stuff like that. But it is kind of nice to just like, you know, instantly go from unpainted to what almost looks painted really quick. So yeah, as you can see, just one coat, you're good on that, and we move on to the flesh wash. Now you could do, you know, Seraphim Sepia or something like that from Games Workshop. I list what I use, and I try to just kind of vary, and it just depends. This is one miniature, so I just use a little dropper bottle from the Army Painter, but feel free to use a pot from Games Workshop or what have you, doesn't matter. Either way, this is just kind of a light brown orangey kind of wash. That's normally the flesh ones that have maybe a little bit of orange in them, hence the sepia in the Games Workshop version. And yeah, you just plop it on there. Pretty easy stuff, if I do say so myself. A quick note while we're watching this: if you're watching this as I paint this and you haven't yet, link in the description below. You can check out both the store to the kind of Aeon Trespass world. There's a lot of miniatures there that you can get in this resin kind of version that's really nice. Or you can, of course, check out the Kickstarter for the Odyssey kind of game that they have out right now on Kickstarter. For highlighting back, the first step you always want to do is go back to the base color. So I'm getting some basic skin tone back here. This is just plain basic skin tone, but watered down quite a bit. So you notice I'm very lightly touching the miniature. My point isn't even bending. Very lightly touch it, and you're going to want most of it out. You notice the belly of the brush isn't like completely sogging full, and this is quite watered down. So when it's wet, it's going to reflect back to you, so it's going to look brighter, right, because it's reflecting the light. As it dries, it's going to kind of smooth out a little bit more, and this ends up being a kind of a nice transition, so you don't have big thick lines where the muscles would be. You look almost kind of cell shaded, like kind of a cartoony look too. Some people like that. Some people like doing an even darker wash, and you get those recesses. It really ups the contrast, makes it look nice at the tabletop, but how far I'm zoomed in here, it would look kind of sloppy. We don't necessarily want that, but you do want that contrast, so we're going to be building up to that. We're just going to put a little bit of effort into it, but again, this is most of the model here, an important part of it, and you want it to look good. As I always say, or at least as I say sometimes, if you're going to spend the time to paint a miniature, you may as well do it right. That's why I cleaned up some of the mold lines here, that's why I primed it, and that's why I'm taking my time highlighting it. I'm not trying to do a quick job here, I'm not trying to rush through it, I'm trying to make it look nice. But yeah, really what you're trying to do is get like 80% of it highlighted, and so really just the recesses should be that darkened color, otherwise you're back to the basic skin tone. Now, I'm not painting with white here. What I do when I post the white, typically unless I am painting with white, is I'm adding a little bit of white into it. A lot of people use an off-white. You can use a white gray or like a mummy robe, like a yellow kind of white as well. You can do something like that if you so choose. I tend just to add white to it. So this is a little bit of white added to it, so it's a little bit brighter, and again, very thinned down. So it's going to look even brighter wet. What you're seeing right now, it's actually going to be a little bit less, like one step below this. Once it dries and it's not reflecting the light, it's a little bit more matte finished. But the wet part of it, where it makes it easier to see, this is really useful if you're glazing, which highlighting and glazing is pretty close when you think about kind of the consistency you're doing it, depending on, again, on application, of course, and just kind of how you're painting. So again, just really watered down paint, so it's gonna be pretty transparent here So you're going to see the layers below it a little bit. And again, you're going to want to not do the 80%. You're going to do, I tend to say 80% of the 80%. But really, it depends on the mass or the area that you're painting. So if there's a big, kind of muscle mass, you're gonna maybe paint all of it, and depending on if it's like his pec, so it's gonna get a lot of light, maybe you do almost all of it. But either way, you want kind of a little bit of just the basic skin tone showing that that base coat you did, and then you're highlighting up to that. Now a third level of highlight, or second or fourth, depending on how you look at the spectrum, because we have the shaded, then we have the regular, and we have the first highlight, and now the second highlight. So 4 levels of darkness and brightness here, and again, just doing even less, just trying to get those reflection points on the back of the calf, stuff like that, really just making it kind of pop, and kind of match the concept art a little bit. So speaking of the concept art in Aeon Trespass, pretty much everything has kind of a sepia tone to it. Everything just looks kind of brown, kind of a tan overlay on it. It's not very saturated in colors. There's no bright colors anywhere. It's almost like monochrome. There's not a lot there. So you see like his sail pants or whatever, or skirt, or a tunic. I don't know what you call it. In the concept art, it looks like it's like, like it's been in the mud or something like that. It looks really, really dirty. I'm not going to make it that dirty. However, I'm going to keep that in mind, and kind of that overall feel and that world feel, just to kind of make it, thematically fit. So, because when you do white, and I can talk about this a bit later, but when you do white, a lot of people will use blue as a shadow, or even like a purple or something like that. Something on that cool spectrum. Cool washes, or cool shadows tend to work really good to make clean looking white. If you want it dirty looking white, you get kind of in the reds and the browns, right? And I'm going to do kind of a brown wash on it, make it look maybe not quite the cleanest, and kind of edge the kind of the miniature in general, because we already have all the skin to be on that spectrum. But we're going to have some fun on the base too. So as you can tell, this takes a while. This is a lot of highlighting. I'm showing you kind of in general my steps. So if I spent a long time on it, you're probably going to get a bit more of it in the video, just so you kind of can understand the time investment in each spot. Some things go quick, sometimes don't. The skin, take your time on it, make it look good. Alright, next up is the uniform gray. This is going to be for like kind of the rocks you see on the base. So the base has like this exposed rock. It could have been hardened dirt. I went with the rock just because I wanted to have multiple colors on the base. And they also have the rock outcrops, and when looking at that, in my mind, it doesn't look like it's a rock on top of it. It looks like it's almost one thing for a lot of these, like it's not just a rock on dirt per se. So I'm painting kind of all those flat stone, these gray colors, right? So just a base coat here. Now I will say, not having these pre-assembled normally isn't too big of a problem, because they have flat bases in a lot of board games, and so you're just, maybe add a rock in front of it or in the back or a bush somewhere. But having it fully modeled like this, even underneath the miniature, is with this miniature, because of his legs are apart, fairly easy to paint. It's not a pain to paint. It is a pain to show you guys though, because I'm painting underneath the miniature, so kind of hard to get that in. Alright, while we're letting that dry a little bit, we're going to do some gunmetal, and we're going to get all these jacks. I'm going to call them jacks. I don't know what they are. They're like little matrix things as far as I can tell. But they're just in his body. And there's 2 in the leg, and then there's like 3 or 4 in his chest. There's 1 in the back and 2 on the side. Again, because it's pre-assembled though, one of the sides you can't really get to, not without taking at least the shield off. Maybe even the whole arm off. So I don't paint it. I'm going to show you that in a bit. I wanted to, because you can kind of see it. You can like barely see it. So this one's fine, right? His arm's kind of out. You can see it there. There's the jack. I'm going to paint that in. Looks cool, I guess. Maybe a little bit painful. And then he has a big one on the back. That's like maybe the main one. I don't know. But this one in the corner here, I mean, I really want to, again, if you're going to spend the time to paint it, you may as well paint it right. But unless I disassemble it and I've already painted it, it's not going to happen. So yeah, forget that. Alright, so the one in the back, this one's like actually protruding out. It's like some like screw-on jacket. It looks kind of gross in a cool way, and so I'm down with that. And I actually like how prominent it is. It is right underneath these tubes, and I'm going to paint that almost completely last. But I'm not going to paint a metallic. So again, concept art, you only see the front of the miniature. So the back of the miniature, you can kind of go wild. So if you see some wires, you see some tubes there, do whatever you want. I'm going to keep using this gunmetal and do the dark portion of the helmet. So his helmet, his mask that they all have in this world building that they've done here, this IP, this Aeon Trespass world. They're kind of all metal or whatever, but this one has kind of a light metal and a dark metal, so I'm doing this as the dark metal portion of it. And changing up colors, I think in general, just add to the visual complexity, even if it's on a subconscious level of a miniature. So if you have multiple browns, use multiple browns. Don't make the boat the same color as the trees, the same color as the twigs, the same color as this rope. Do different browns. Now, it doesn't necessarily make it look better, it's debatable, but I think it adds to the visual complexity, which is kind of nice. So speaking of which, you could use gunmetal here. I'm switching to Vallejo's natural steel here for kind of the trim, the very front part. I don't know boat terminology. The metal bit on the boat, and then his guard, and we're just going to kind of keep painting a few different ones. The pommel's going to be a different color. Just kind of trying to varying it. So the blade here, again, natural steel, and the blade has a whole bunch of nicks in it. Now, a lot of the item cards you can actually get. So like the shield is an item. I was able to get the item card and really look at the art kind of with better coloring and more detail. And so I was able to get that, but the sword, I wasn't able to find a match for it, sadly. Plate mail metal is my light silver that I talked about. This is going to be on the pretty much all the rest of the metal here on the helmet. And then we're also going to do some highlighting as well. And this is a really, really nice, one of my go-to metals, actually. So Army Painter gets a lot of flack, and I give it to him too a lot of times because coverage isn't that great on a lot of them. But I do like a lot of their metallics. They're not super glittery, which I appreciate. I normally find a lot of Vallejo metallics to be super glittery, and I don't necessarily want my metal to look bedazzled. I just want it to look shiny. And so this is a really good one, though. I really like this one. It does a great highlight, especially if you've added Nuln Oil to a silver to really darken it up. Then you can highlight it up with something like this. It looks really good. Alright, next up, speaking of a dark wash, this is Dark Tone, again by Army Painter. You could have used Nuln Oil if you had that, really just any black wash. If you actually look at the hex value, it says all zeros, it's just pure black, but in wash form. Does great on grays, does great on, well, I mean, just about anything. It's liquid talent is what this is, but it's going to add the recesses, the shadow portion that we want. And then again, we're going to pop the highlight up, just like we did on the skin. So I'm going to put this on all of the gray, and again, let it pool. It's kind of naturally what it does. So these washes are kind of thinner, and so they'll pool into the recesses and just barely cover the flat portions or the raised portions. So it's kind of transparent a little bit, and so it kind of builds on itself. So the more is pooled, the more you're seeing of it, and the darker it is. That's why it's so dark in those recesses. But on the jacks, pretty much all the metal, we're just going to kind of cover almost everything we've painted that isn't skin so far with this. Alright, next up we have plate mail metal out again. As I said, this makes a great highlight. So now that we've darkened it up, all of it's kind of dark, gives this plate mail metal out. It's going to look like it's shining or glinting off of you know, the light source. Now, the reason we paint on highlights, the reason you don't just want to like gloss coat this thing and assume that works is because of the scale difference. So because these are smaller, the light reflection isn't going to work the same. The recesses in that sword are very, very small in real life. Now, for the scale of the miniature, those should be deep gashes into the sword, but light here isn't, you know, on your game board table isn't going to reflect that way. Even on my painting studio area here, it's going to spill into the shadows when it should and stuff like that. And so painting in highlights helps with that. You can do a general highlight like what I do. So I'm essentially highlighting as if there's multiple light sources kind of all around, like it's the middle of the day or something like that. But if you have like a lantern in front of them or something like that, if you're doing Kingdom Death Monsters or whatever, you can do kind of object source lighting and you know, purposely set a mood or something like that. You know, if you want a sunset, you can get, you know, even yellow highlights. You can go crazy with it. For me, I tend to just to do all around highlighting just to kind of help pop shape and details from a distance. So when you're looking at it on the table, you know, 3-4 feet away, and it's sitting there on as a game piece, you can still tell the difference in the details. It's one of the nice things about painting is it's not just a gray blob like it often is, where it's just kind of a general shape. Instead, you can actually see details. So you'll see the wooden shield, and you'll see the sail skirt, whatever junk, and you know, just stuff like that, which is nice. Okay, to pop out the rocks. Now, with rocks, I tend to go high contrast, so I go straight from the darkened, washed color to a level highlight. So I'm not getting that uniform gray back out. I'm going straight to ash gray, and I'm dry brushing it in. It just means I got the brush and I put some paint on it, and then I got it on a napkin and got almost all the paint out. So there's just a little bit of paint pigment on the brush, so when I brush it across something, it barely gets on the raised edges of everything. Looks really nice. For the pommel, I wanted it to be a little bit darker, and so I went LEADBELCHER with that. LEADBELCHER, if you're in the Games Workshop spectrum, if you're going with the pots, is fairly comparable for me to natural steel, as in it's a great base coat. You can actually still darken it a little bit. No, it doesn't show up quite as well, and it's a little bit darker, but it highlights up fantastic. So let's go ahead and highlight that up, and again, just a quick little job there, nothing too bad. And then we're going to go with the rough iron. Now, this is something I debated on doing, but in the end, I thought it popped it out quite nice. Rough iron is a very dark brown looking silver, so it's actually kind of a little brown, but I'm putting it on the little studs on his helmet, and they just make it pop. It just adds a little bit of, again, that visual complexity to it. Instead of just letting the wash do it, I'm actually painting it a little bit darker, like it's a different metal, and it just, I think, adds a little bit to it. Now, one of the biggest portions of this miniature, surprisingly from surface area, because you see the front and the back and kind of the inside of it, is the boat. So while it's maybe not as big, you get both sides of it, and you get the inside, and it just takes a while too, because as you can see with the arm there pre-installed, it's a pain. Shields are always, on pre-assembled minis, hard to paint. They're never fun. Anything that's holding something in front of its chest is just brutal. It's hard because, again, your brush is, you know, straight and long, and you gotta fit it in there and not make a mess, and it can just take some time. That being said, the only thing you've painted is the metal part here and the hand, so as long as you're careful on there, as you can see, I'm just going to town on this. You just go real quick. Just, you know, a lot of times when I do something like that, I'll actually paint around the portion I've already painted, you know, kind of an outline, and then really quick paint inside. Now, there are some patches on the outside, and if you look at the artwork on the item card, they're darker. So I went with some werewolf fur here. It's not that darker. I actually put 2 coats on it, though I'm only going to show you one, just because it's Army Painter, and so I watered it down, and it was too watery, but if I don't water it down enough, you see the brush, whatever, it's Army Painter. You just kind of have to deal with it. But I didn't want it, like, obnoxiously darker, but I wanted it to look like, you know, at least tried to make it match, but just a little bit darker. Now I'm also going to take this werewolf fur and reuse it for the dirt. So when it's surrounded by the gray on the base and even some of the green and reds that we put in there, more on the reds later, it's going to look a little bit different next to those colors than it will be surrounded by the boat. So by the end of it, even though it's the same color, it doesn't look it. You don't look at it and be like, that's the same color as the dirt. Which is good. Also, I'm going to highlight the dirt a bit, well, a lot differently. But first we gotta wash, so do that strong tone. You can see the planks come out right away as it pulls into the recesses there. It starts looking more like wood. This is already great. That being said, without a highlight, without actually highlighting it up, when you put it on the table and it's a little far away from you, it's just gonna look like a brown blob. I mean, it's better than a just all gray blob, at least you know it's brown now, but a little bit of highlighting will go a long way here. And we're gonna add some, again, just some visual complexity with some trim color. Took a little bit of liberty on that, I think, from the art, but I think it adds to the overall piece a little bit. I was happy with it. Sometimes, I always try to match art, obviously, but sometimes you just gotta be a little creative. So again, I'm not painting with white, obviously, but I added some white to that Steel Legion brown. So I'm going straight to a highlight here. The reason I'm not building it up is because there's not really a lot of surface area to do so. So I can't do the whole 80%. I'd be using like a single strand of hair. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to paint eyes here. So I'm popping the contrast up automatically right away, just to kind of you know, get that contrast, that light to dark ratio that I need in a very little space. Again, you're going to want a good tipped brush if you can. Sometimes it just means cleaning your brush. Maybe you've just been rinsing in some water. Clean out the water and just kind of give it a really good swirl, and that should be good enough. You want the brush to be in kind of good condition, and then just lightly touch. So again, I'm doing slightly you know, a light source here in that I'm doing the top and then the left side on this side, and then on the other side of the boat, I'll be doing the top and then the right side. Kind of like the lights kind of coming in a little bit from the front. It's really all that's showing. As you can see though, just adding that little highlight on the lines makes it seem like those are now planks. You can actually see the planks there now. Before, even with the wash, it wasn't really pulling that well. The detail just wasn't, you know, super deep because it's so small right there. I can understand that, but that paint really adds to it. Same with these kind of windows here. Not windows, but you know, those are kind of gaps. You get that good rectangle look. And as you can already tell with that highlight and the wash in there, it's really starting to look like planks of wood. And I think it ends up really good here. I'm going to do a different technique on the patches. So I'll talk more about that when we get there. So you would think same thing, right? Just add a little bit of white. But as you can tell, I'm like doing dashes into it and it looks kind of silly. And then I dab it with my finger. So a lot of times what you can do, and you kind of have to just play around and judge with how long you have to leave it there. But before it's quite all the way dry, you can use a sponge if you want. I just tend to use my finger. You can just dab it really quick and you're going to lift some of the paint up and it's just going to make it a little bit fainter. So the planks have no kind of wood grain on it like the other one did, and I wanted that. So what I'm doing is I'm adding those lines, kind of like wood grain a little bit, and then dabbing it so it's a little bit fainter, so it doesn't look like I painted on lines, because that's kind of silly. Anyway, it's a cool technique. I do it every now and then. I wish I could say I plan it ahead of time. I don't. I tend just to realize that I want to do it in the moment and then do it. So flat earth is the kind of highlight choice here, and as you can tell, I'm actually just using the side of my brush. So sometimes if you want a little bit more paint, or if you need to be careful, you don't want to do the dry brush because you tend to get it kind of everywhere. In this case, I don't want brown on the gray, especially on his foot as well. So I'm just using the side of my brush to kind of put it on the top parts there. The flat earth is a bit more orangey, so it's shifting it a bit more to the orange, and I'm going to end up tying that into the base. The base is going to be just a bit more red in general. I'm going to add some red tones to this when I can. Add a little bit of white here and a very light dry brush, being very careful, just getting that contrast up a tiny bit more. I wasn't quite happy with just the regular flat earth. Now, another brown. This is DEATHCLAW brown. Now, it says DEATHCLAW brown, but it's almost closer to orange. It's a very orangey brown. Again, with the red tones, you'll kind of see a theme here. So I want this to, again, be a little cohesive as a miniature, and again, kind of fit the thematic tone and coloration of a lot of the art here. So adding some trim color really spices up the boat, I feel. I think it really makes it pop a lot, kind of sections and compartmentalizes a lot of it, and it's kind of an exciting way to add a little bit of a bright color without being silly. I'm not adding like yellow painted trim or anything crazy like that. This is just a DEATHCLAW brown, but I think it looks really, really sweet as a trim. Looks really nice. I highly suggest you you do something like this if you want. Again, you can paint your miniature however you want. This is how I'm painting mine, but I think it looks pretty sweet. I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Next up, we're finally doing a different color. This is the green skin that we're putting on these bushes here. This is really fun. I really like doing this, mainly because I think anytime you can add a pop of color that doesn't necessarily quite match, it's good. Now, red and green work great together. It's why you see them paired so much. It's why Spider-Man with his red suit has so many green villains. I don't know if that's actually why, but think about it, you'll notice he has a lot of green villains. Anyway, they work really good together. So adding the red hues, and again, you'll see more about that with the wood. I'll talk more about that later. It works so it doesn't clash, but it's still a bright pop of color that you can add kind of safely to it. And especially putting it just on the base, it kind of helps make the Titan almost seem slightly out of place in a really cool way I like. So I have the military shader on here. Again, this is just the Army Painter version. Any green wash will work, though the darker the green wash, in my opinion, the better, because you're going to want the kind of crazy highlight that I'm going to do here. So notice here, this is it's almost like an amber green. This is hemp rope, again from Army Painter. It's actually one of my favorite colors from them. Anytime I can use it, I tend to enjoy it. What I like about it is when you highlight green, it adds just a little bit of that amber kind of, not quite an autumn look to it, but because it's not just a bright green, it tends to look to me more natural, more earthy, as opposed to like some kind of neon green. A lot of times when you get the bright greens, I think it looks a little bit silly. You don't tend to see really bright greens like a moot green in nature, but this hemp rope, I think it looks great. Again, not dry brushing, but using the side of my brush to kind of rub against the raised portions. Alright, now we have to paint this dead horse here. I'm doing DEATHCLAW brown again. You could have done it at the same time, and in fact you should learn from my mistakes if you're following my painting guide here, or at least my painting scheme. But I kind of forgot about the horse. So last minute I'm like, oh, that's right, I was going to do the horse. I did look up horses, and at one point I was going to actually do some wet blending on the horse even to kind of make the top side of the horse, if it was standing up, a little bit darker, but with the position of it right next to his foot between some rocks and some trees, and just the scale of it, I wasn't going to put myself through that, so I just base coated. Didn't even put a wash on it. I think it still looks great. Now, Cavalry brown. This is a very red brown. It's one of my favorite colors, mainly because I like dark, earthy looking kind of reds anyway. And this was I almost didn't do this. I wanted to add a pop of red, but still make it believable. And you could still do that with the tree, especially with how I highlight it up, where this is really just a base coat. But I did want, I wanted these reds in there, but I didn't want it to look silly. I didn't want it to look unbelievable. You let me know in the comments below if you think if this worked or not, if this was a good idea. I think it turned out well. It doesn't look Christmassy right next to the green, especially with the highlight you'll see. It looks like a really cool kind of, just red oak kind of looking tree that I think isn't necessarily what you're going to expect. I don't think many people would go here and necessarily paint the trees red, which I like. It makes it a little bit unique. It makes it seem like you put some thought into it, maybe. So anyway, you don't have to like it, But let me know if you think it turned out alright. I guess let me know if you think it turned out dumb. Sure, why not? Just be nice about it. Again, you want to be careful here. This is almost the last thing painted on the base, so you're not going to want to get a whole bunch of red on a bush or something like that. And what better way to highlight it than red leather? Red's in the name. That being said, this is not as red as Cavalry Brown. This is much more of a red-hued brown. Again, closer to orange than red, per se, like a lot of these browns are, but a really good highlight on it. And I'm going to use this to paint the last of the base, which are like these branches or twigs, or I mean, they're kind of oddly shaped, but they're all, you kind of see them, the little squiggly things over the rocks. I'm going to paint those as if they're like tree branches. I wasn't quite sure what they were, but that's what I'm assuming is they're branches. And I'm also going to highlight this up a little higher. Again, wasn't planned. I planned on just doing the red leather, but once you do it, feel free to change your plan. I like planning. I plan all my paintings so I can do stuff like color theory. Well, I don't know any color theory. Don't let me, tell you that I know anything of what I'm doing. Things that I think would look nice. I try to plan that out. But sometimes you gotta change plans. In this case, I thought it needed more highlights. I'm gonna add some white to it in a bit. Now, these branches though, again, be super careful. I'm skipping over a lot of this, but it does take some time because you're gonna be very careful not to make a mess here. It'll be kind of hard to clean up, especially with washes, because you're gonna have tide marks where you can see a line where the wash was added. It gets messy quick. Alright, I told you, I promised. We're going to add some white to that red leather, just kind of up it a little bit, and I think this is a great end to the kind of red wood here. It's still in kind of the red. I mean, at this point, it's like getting close to almost a pink, but I think it's like 2 steps below that, so that's a good thing. I don't want pink trees. I'm not doing Dr. Seuss here. Let's not get crazy. I mean, unless you want to get crazy, then I guess have pink trees and give them a purple tunic or skirt or whatever. I don't care. I'm not judging. But on mine, I didn't want pink. But as you can see, that highlight just makes it look that much better, especially from a distance. From a distance, you're actually going to be able to tell the texture. Up close, I think it still looks good too. It's always a kind of a balancing point between looking good up close and looking good far away. All right, so like I said, kind of an off-white, a kind of a yellowish white. We're doing mummy robes as the base coat. If you're going to paint something white, don't actually paint it white. Highlight up to white, maybe. So one of the first things I can suggest anybody get, if they're just building out their paint catalog, from Vallejo, get black gray and white gray. What's great about both of those is you can paint something black and have it not actually be black, or white and not actually be white. Rarely is anything pure white or pure black. That's just not that common in this world. I mean, it just isn't. Normally it's a shade. If you go to your closet and look at all your black shirts, I bet you're going to see some variation even with your black shirts. They're not all actually pure black. Same with the white. And again, with the theme, I wanted it kind of a brownish kind of white. These mummy robes work really good like that. You could even do almost a skeleton color. I think that would work too. And then we're going to do a soft tone here on the skirt. You might have noticed a shadow. My youngest daughter, she's watching me paint this section of it. She thought it was pretty cool. But you could do a flesh wash. And again, it would be even lighter, but I want it to be kind of dirty up. I'm going to highlight it a lot, though. But again, I didn't want it to look super clean. But you don't want to leave it like this, because you can barely tell the difference between the skin. And so from far away, it's going to look naked. You definitely don't want that. Again, maybe you do. I don't know. Alright, so now we got white gray out. I'm going to be highlighting with white gray. And the beard, I'm going to make white gray. So again, just adding a little bit of visual difference between colors that are similar, if you can, just, I think, helps sell the believability of the miniature. So he has a white beard and he has these white kind of sail things, or the skirt, tunic, whatever, I don't know what it is, wrapping. And the default thing I think a lot of people do is just paint them both the same color. They're both white, let's paint them both white. But if you don't, if you do one mummy robe and one white gray and then put the soft tone on both, they're going to be just a smidge difference. And I think even if you don't, you're not going to look at them and be like, those are two different whites, like right off the bat. That's not the first thing you're going to notice. But your brain's going to take that in and just make it, again, a little bit more believable, a little bit more like, hey, that looks good. I mean, if you paint it well, I suppose. Now, the highlighting on here, I do want to point out, this whole thing's confusing. How they sculpted this, I like it, but at the same time, when it comes to painting it, it's hard to decide what's what. So, if you look at the artwork of the sails, it has like obviously all the patchwork in it, of like this brown stuff. And in fact, the artwork has like a belt, and he doesn't have any sense of belt on the miniature here. He has more of like a rope tie around his waist, and then kind of slashes through it. But deciding what's crinkled sail and what's the lining that's going to be brown, kind of hard. What I decided to do was highlight it all, you know, any raised portion, and then if I paint over a highlight with brown because I decide it's the rope, no harm done. Again, you're going to want to highlight that little section up here. It looks like it's kind of an expandable over his face, and then it kind of sinks onto it, which I think is kind of cool. So soft tone now on the beard as well, but again, it's going on the white gray instead of mummy robes, and then it's going to highlight up as well too. So it's going to end up with the same highlight, but a different undertone. So now we have actual white. I'm actually using white. Oftentimes, typically, when I'm painting white, I will highlight all the way up to white. Again, you can stop a step early too. It just depends on what you do. And then again on here, I'm just kind of using the side of the brush, sometimes a point to get little dash marks, but I'm just trying to get that texture of the beard to show through the highlights. So the recesses of that texture are completely shadowed, and then really I've probably covered most of the white gray up with the white at this point. Same here with the sails. I'm just going to highlight everything and then figure out the rope situation later. Speaking of which, guys, I know this is a longer video than probably you're used to a lot of YouTubers showing, but I try to show you my process and actually explain what it is I'm doing each time. And I mean, this took like 4 hours of me painting, so it's a lot shorter than what it took me. But we are almost done. We're almost to the home stretch, so you know, just hang in there, I guess. Alright, now we have chocolate brown. I told you we'd come back to chocolate brown. I told you. I hope you didn't forget. Maybe you did. I actually kind of forgot I did too. But we're at chocolate brown. I love chocolate brown. It's a great color, and it looks kind of like chocolate. Here, again, I could have used Steel Legion drab. I could have used Cavalry brown. I could have used any of the browns. I did use Werewolf fur, but I didn't. I picked a different brown. If you have multiple browns, you should use them. That way, the rope doesn't look like wood or dirt, like it looks like a different material because that's colored differently. You know, it's pretty rare that you're going to be standing. I don't care if you got brown shoes, it doesn't mean if you step on dirt they're going to be the same color. Again though, figuring this out, first of all, this took a long time. Like, take your time, use just the tip. You don't want to make a mess here. I still did it a few spots. It's okay if you do. You can because these are pretty much right near like where you highlight. You can just kind of do a few coats to patch it up if you need to, but in general, take your time and be as thorough as possible. But figuring out where to draw these lines and where not to, I don't think I did a perfect job, but I think I did a good enough job to sell the look, if that makes sense. So I got to a point where you know, I was asking my wife, well, do you think this is one? Do you think it's not one? And at the end of the day, I just stopped where I was and said, okay, this looks like what I want it to look like. These pipes, I told you they'd be kind of, or these tubes, kind of the last thing we paint here, and I didn't want to paint them metallic, and so I went with a black gray, kind of like a black, you know, tube going between it. I thought it would be kind of stark. Again, you don't see the back of the miniature or in any kind of art that I know of, and therefore you can kind of go to town on this. Paint it whatever you want. Paint it bright blue, I don't care. I'm painting in this black gray, again, because I don't want to do black, but I want them to be black tubes, so I'm using black gray. And then I'm actually going to highlight up from that. Next, for the, there's like these wires here. I chose crusted sword for the base coat. I wanted, especially at the top of the miniature, right, because it's at the base, Again, another splash of color. I also wanted to have some of that red from the base come all the way up to the top, so it's almost like encapsulating or framing this miniature, and it's just fun. I love highlighting red. You'll see that real soon here. Uniform gray for the first level highlight on the tubes here. But speaking on those red wires, again, I just thought it'd be nice to kind of bring it throughout the whole miniature here. And when it's on the table, you're gonna see those like red those red wires, just a hint of it, and I think it just looks cool. A little splash of color. Lava orange for the highlight, and oh man, I mean, I don't know about you, but that looks awesome to me. I love using lava orange to highlight red as like the last highlight. It's just bright enough to almost look like that reflected light kind of thing. It looks great in my mind. And then again, I really liked these wires and tubes, so I wanted them to pop out. So I got the ash gray out again. We used that earlier as a dry brush on the rocks, just as kind of an extreme highlight on those tubes. Really make them pop, look really nice, especially down on that table while you're fighting, you know, giant primordials. This is it. This is the last color. We got black gray out again for the rim. I don't ever paint my rims black. I think, again, black is too stark. Anytime I see black painted rimmed bases, that's what I'm looking at, is the rim. And I wanted the rim to ideally kind of blend out. So I think a dark gray works really good for that. It just kind of lets the top of the base really stand out without you instantly going to this pure black ring on a game board, which I think is a little bit too starky. So now I have done a matte varnish, but I still want a little bit of shine to that metallic. This is an optional step, and as you can tell, I definitely need to replace my varnish brush. They get tore up with the varnish, so you need to kind of go through them, but ideally you have a better point than this. But again, a little bit of a gloss coat on top of a matte varnish, just where I want the armor bits to kind of be shiny. I think, again, just make them pop a little bit more. Alright, and here is Herodotus. Here is the finished miniature. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that journey. I hope you like what I ended up doing. Again, comment below. I'd love to know what you think about the red trees. Are they too red? Does it work? Does it fit the mini? Does it not? I went back and forth on it, but at the end of the day, it's my mini and I wanted it red. But anyway, you can kind of see some of the difficulties with the model just because of the pose, but I think it turned out pretty good. I think he looks great. If you did enjoy the video, if you enjoyed the kind of the miniature painting process, or just some insights into why I did what I did, or how these minis look while it's still on Kickstarter, be sure to let me know with a like down below. I will be giving away Oathsworn soon. I'll have a video on that again very soon. I don't keep teasing that. It'll come, but only to subscribers. So if you're not subscribed, be sure to subscribe for that, especially because you're gonna have to comment on the video. And so if you don't have that notification bell, I don't know how YouTube's gonna advertise that video. So who knows? If this looks interesting, if you want to see Aeon Trespass, I have a review down below, I have an unboxing down below, I have a details video down below, I have links to their web store and their current Kickstarter, which is it's like last week now, so they just announced a crossover with Madara, so if you're interested in that, again, link down in the description below. Guys, thanks so much for watching, thanks always for being here, and a super big shout out to all of my patrons who help support this channel so that I can remain engaged with all of these games and provide more honest coverage. As always, guys, thanks so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.